So, welcome to the latest edition of our Plugging Away podcast. My name is Francis Norman. I'm the CEO here with CODA, and I'm delighted today to be speaking with Nick McNally from Decom Engineering. How are you doing, Nick?
I'm good. Yeah.
Brilliant. Do you want to just quickly introduce yourself? What your role is here?
Yeah. So I'm MD here at Decom Engineering. So I always say I'm sort of the least engineering in the business. So I tend to focus more on the sales and the marketing and the finance and legal and so on, and let the engineers get on with what they do best.
You clear the path for them to get
exactly
and make sure they can get paid to do what they do.
exactly, and they're all good at it.
No, that's good. So, Decom Engineering, you've been around a few years now. Do you want to maybe just talk a bit about the history and what it is that you do and where your specialties lie?
Yeah, so Decom's gone through probably 2 or 3 different iterations until it arrived at where it is now. So it was originally run by its founders as more of a kind of a research, doing a bit of fabrication projects, things like that in the early 2010s. We actually developed our first product on which we raised all our initial funds on was a coating removal machine. So still in the decom space, but it was taking old oil and gas pipes, or even we sold a machine to a pipe mill, an Egyptian state pipe mill, which would remove the 3-layer coatings in a cold method. So it worked really well. Big giant machine that would clean these pipes, and then you could put it into piling, and you would allow you to have a massive carbon footprint saving, about 98% carbon footprint saving by reusing the steel. And we put a joint venture into Holland in the beginning of 2021, just as COVID was starting.
Ouch.
So we installed a machine in the middle of that. The business worked really well. We cleaned a whole load of pipe, and it worked really, really well. And then our partner, who was the buyer of the pipe, and then we would clean it and he would sell it into the construction market, said, "Look, guys, I'm really sorry. I've got no one to sell the construction market in Europe shut down. So I'm afraid I'm not going to buy any more pipe." So COVID literally, we talk about COVID killing business models. It literally killed that business model overnight. So we had a big giant machine sitting in Holland. Luckily, because that had worked so well and that model was going well, we had recently raised some funds. So we had a product sitting in the shed, which was chop saws, and we took them out and we worked on them, and we launched a 12 and a 24-inch model. And I can still remember this day, we came over and we actually went to Bremen's yard, and Bremen were really, really supportive in the early days. We went there and they were, we did demos and everybody went, this is brilliant, really love it. Can see why it's better and faster, but chicken and egg, no one wanted to be the first one to take it. Eventually, luckily, Subsea 7 turned up and they had a production spool for shell penguins they needed cutting. And it was big, thick duplex, all thickness. And it was heavy PU coating, so the shears were struggling to pinch through it. The diamond wire saw was getting gummed up by the PU coating. So they said, can you cut it? And we'd never really, because you couldn't get hold of that stuff, so we'd never really cut it before. And, yeah, no problem, we can do it. Don't you worry about it. Stuck it on, 25 minutes, clean cut. Do it again, 25 minutes, clean cut. About a week later, we were subsea on a shell platform on shell penguins. Did a good job, and that was really it. From there, we've been saws, and we've never looked back, and we're only saws now. And that's it.
Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it, that a pivot like that COVID could have easily have killed.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Just that you happen to have another product available that suddenly found a market. It's just remarkable. Yeah. So, and your saws, I've seen your saws. I've seen the demos of the saws. I've been and stood inside the jaws of the saws in your facility here, which feels, I don't know, a little bit like something from a Bond movie type of a situation.
Yeah,
you see the saws blade sitting there, but you've got quite a range now. Yeah,
so we've got 19 saws overall, but we've got a growing range. So in the last sort of 12 to 18 months, we've launched 4 models. So we've launched our C116. So we kind of went big, small, and then smaller again. So we started off with the 12 and 24s, which were not neutrally buoyant, very heavy models, very built for robustness. Went up to the 46-inch, was the giant jaws you're standing in. And then we built a 32-inch for the Ren Charlie conductors. And that was a big challenge because we had to make it neutrally buoyant so it could fly in on an ROV underneath. So taking that bigger saw, that worked brilliantly. So then we've gone down from that to build a 16-inch model, and that's worked really well. So we've already, in the last 12 months, we've built 4 of those. building a fifth one at the moment. So they're easy to fly around the world. They go onto ROVs, they're easy to deploy. And they're covering a lot of range still at 1 to 16 inch. And then we've stuck those on the end of a spreader beam, which is actually working off in Australia. So that's going really, really well. The idea being cut and recovery. So client that we originally worked on phase 1 loved the cutting, but wanted to speed up the vessel time. So it's nothing actually amazing. Engineers will shoot me saying that, but it's our saws on the end of a spreader beam. But it's executed brilliantly by them, and it works really well. And we're getting up to 30 cuts in a shift, in a 12-hour shift now. So it's down, cut, lift, dropping baskets. So given the amount of sort of flexies and so on, umbilicals coming out, it's going to be really useful. And then we've got a C110, which will be an alternative to super grinder. That'll be finished, I think, tomorrow, actually. So yeah, the guys might even have it ready to show you today. But that's, an alternative to super grinder, basically a little 10-inch saw that doesn't need any buoyancy on it, straight on the end of an ROV manipulator arm. So that'll be nice. And then our first onshore model. So I'm very excited. So we've done a couple of onshore jobs, decommissioning. We did the Barrow Islands, which was really cool, and then the excavator. Obviously, all our cuts here, all our trial cuts are onshore and dry. So we know the tool works really, really well dry because it's effectively a milling process. And then we did a job recently for the kind of Dutch version of British gas. I don't know what your Australian gas regulator is, but it's that equivalent in Holland. And they were decommissioning a pipeline on the Dutch-Belgian border, and it had gas contamination in, so they didn't want to use anything that was hot work. So our saw and then an excavator, but it was always using our subsea saw. So they were maybe heavier, not quite the right design. You need a bigger excavator. See, you're having to kind of charge more or take a hit because you've got subsea lead screws on there, you've got aluminium fittings, you've got all those different things that make it suitable for subsea, rigging points, lifting points. So we've actually just building our first unit, which is going to go and cut onshore wellheads in California. So end of excavator, clear it out, cut, lift, drop, cut, lift, drop. So I'm very excited about the onshore market. It's something that is now with our new products. So the range is quite wide now, which has its own challenges, but overall gives us a lot more opportunities.
Yes, awesome. It seems every other month I see another product coming out from you guys. I wasn't even aware that you were getting into that in the onshore side. I just assumed it would be the same tooling, but it makes perfect sense. That you build an onshore one that doesn't have to have all the specs for an offshore.
It's cheaper to build. They're obviously offshore is cost sensitive, but offshore is even more cost sensitive. So they'll build what they need. And then it's the excavator footprint as well. They want to be on the site. They want to be on a wheeled excavator, not a tracked excavator. And it was the same with Barrow Islands. They wanted a very limited footprint. So, that was very useful that way.
Wowzers. So that's sort of the business side evolution. The other side for me is how your own career has gone. You started off saying you're the least engineering person in Decom Engineering. It must have been an interesting journey to get to where you.
Yeah, no, it was good. It's been good, and didn't really. I kind of expected myself to be in technology by this point rather than engineering. More software. That was kind of my background. So, but again, not from an engineering perspective. So, I did my degree in Manchester. Always knew I wanted to do the more entrepreneurial stuff. Just don't know why. Just always did. Knew that's what I kind of wanted to do, and went to Manchester University. Had a year in Canada. So they had a course that came with American Business Studies. So I went to Schulich Business School in Canada. And I always say that was amazing for me because I learned more in that third year in Canada than I learned anywhere else during my degree, because Schulich Business School in Toronto was all ex-professionals teaching you. You didn't do, in Manchester, even in second or final year, you'd write an essay. And it would be about the impact of the Industrial Revolution on this, and write a 2,000-word essay. And you don't, and then you get your references right. The Canadian University didn't have any of that. It was proper. It wasn't academics. It was all industry professionals teaching you. Every class was 3 hours long. Every single week, an hour and a half of that class was group presentations. So every week you had presentations. If you didn't come prepared and you weren't able to do the presentations, they frog marched you out of the room. So it wasn't going and sitting in a lecture hall hungover, and you could not turn up not on your A game. So that was amazing. And then always knew I wanted a gap year. So I'd done all the fun stuff in uni. I'd done the marketing, the strategy, all the nice courses. Hadn't done any finance, and kind of knew that was a gap in if I wanted to be an entrepreneur. and knew I wanted a gap year, and the only places that you could apply for, you couldn't do Procter & Gamble or Unilever or places like that and get a year off, but the Big Four did a year off. So I applied to the Big Four, did my interviews, got Ernst & Young, and they gave me the job, which meant I could go and have 15 months of fun, knowing I had a job to come back to, and not, a lot of friends would waste their gap year having to do interviews and try and get a graduate job. So went off, lucky enough to travel the world, had a girlfriend in Canada at the time still from the uni, so lived in Toronto for a while, lived in Ottawa for a while, went all sort of around the world, traveled South America, various different bits, went to China, went to Thailand, was very, very lucky, and then came back and joined Ernst & Young Manchester in audit. Hated audit.
Oh, done my company secretary here. That yes,
Yeah,
she's an auditor.
Yeah, it taught me a lot. Taught me a lot about asking questions. Where does information come from? So good foundational skills. Moved to corporate finance for about a year and a half. Left Ernst & Young and went to Africa to work for charity for a while in Uganda.
Wowzers.
So wanted to see if I could do that kind of element of life for maybe a prolonged period of time. I'd done a few bits of volunteering in the past, been to Costa Rica, things like that, and really, really enjoyed it. Did a good few months down there, and a lot of people would stay and make careers and lives down there, and I could see how they did it, but for me it wasn't just quite right. I think I like ski holidays and I like certain things a bit too much, if I'm honest. So that was brilliant fun. Came back and got a job with a guy who was doing outsourced finance for technology startups. So this was the point at which kind of London's version of Silicon Valley started. So there's Silicon Roundabout up at Old Street in London. And at that period of time, things were kicking off. So he started a business which was basically young guys would be raising 2 million, 5 million pound checks with an idea. And they needed to get on and validate that idea, build an MVP, build the product, build their team. The last thing they wanted to do was finance. So he just took that off their hands, did their board packs, their EIS schemes, EMI schemes, all of their incentives, tax calculations, everything, monthly management accounts, cash flows. So that was great because that, you come out of Ernst & Young and £1 million is the rounding error. You're not actually an accountant. So you're a chartered accountant, but you can't close a set of books. You can't do a cash flow. You can't do anything that was useful to me if I wanted to start my own business. So spent about 9 months with him, learned loads, looking after closing the books of 12 to 15 companies, managing some juniors below me, doing the cash flows, doing all that stuff, and landed a bit like the saws, landed on doing R&D tax credits. So we had a client who said to us, typically it was kind of agencies that would do R&D tax credit reports, write the narratives and do the calculations. My old man, the guy who owned the business, Paddock, he was, again, very, very quick, not a bit slow, and clients would come to him and say, right, can you do R&D tax credits? And he went, yeah, of course I can. And then me and him figured it out, and we just taught ourselves to do them. And I really, really enjoyed that. So initially I was doing the numbers and the narrative, and then it got to a point where I was just doing that. I knew I wanted to do something else. I wasn't going to keep doing that, closing the books. So ended up just consulting for him, doing the narratives. So it was brilliant, suited my lifestyle because it meant that I could basically talk to the developers, talk to the business owners, and understand what they did.
Yeah.
Document what was their technical innovation, what their uncertainties, what their projects were. And it was really, really interesting. These guys were doing really, really cool stuff. Spending a lot of money, doing it very, very fast, really innovative. So that was really interesting. And then I was due to go traveling again. And one of my flatmates turned up and said to me, I used to run a gluten-free restaurant in Prague. It was chef and sommelier. I know this amazing beer in the Czech Republic that is a gluten-free beer. What the hell is gluten-free? This is before gluten-free was a free, before it was a craze. I just don't even know what that is. So he said, no, trust me, look, brings the beer over. So, backgrounds, marketing, so on. So said, right, I'll do a blind taste test. So I lined up, your Peroni and your Asahi and a few others and lined them up and did blind taste tests with a variety of people. And I came out on top. And I was like, okay, so that's really interesting. So then I did the whole Factiva data monitor. What is gluten-free? Okay, it's growing. So we basically went to the brewery and said, look, we want to start distributing in the UK and give it a go. And we bought 50 cases off them. We sold 50 cases. I bought another 50 cases, and slowly we then we got a distribution agreement with them for a couple of years. But it was, by that point, we had visited the brewery a few times, and it was, again, that was kind of, when I say I'm not technically minded, I enjoy it. I'm just not an engineer. I enjoy asking the questions and so on. So the brewery was this old traditional batch brewing brewery, all gravity led in a 14th century castle. The town was the brewery, open fermentation tanks. They had their own patented enzyme. So the way that you can make gluten-free beer is you can make it with a non-gluten containing grain, like sorghum or something. Tastes like crap. Tastes like salt. Does not taste like real beer because it's not made with barley. What they had is a patented enzyme that, whilst it sits in the fermentation tanks, bonds with the gluten. And then they sift the gluten out. So it literally bonds with the gluten and takes the gluten out. So it doesn't affect the taste, because you end up still with that barley taste. But it also had all of that elements, things like Guinness have, which the water is critical to the true quality of Guinness. So it was the local water, the local grapes are world-leading famous grapes, their own certain variety. So it had this craft element, and it was on craft beer. So we also realized that, their branding was awful. I mean, their branding was just this old man Czech beer for what needed to be in the UK, a certain type of look. So we ended up, long story short, convincing them to go organic. And then we rebranded it and redesigned it as an organic craft gluten-free beer. But with organic and craft being more of the focus, because again, we went to a lot of gluten-free trade shows, understand the market, and guys and even girls didn't want to be drinking a gluten-free beer. They wanted to drink a beer. They needed to know it was gluten-free. They needed to trust that. So we did that. We got it in Waitrose. We got it in Tesco. We got it in a bunch of different places. We were all lined up to take it internationally. And then the brewery was owned by a guy who was a very talented ex-Cambridge rower. One of these guys who he owns a restaurant called Smithfield in London with John Chiro, the MasterChef guy, a guy called Rolf Munding. But he owned all these different businesses. Yeah. So he owned music business, and he owned restaurants, and he owned hairdressers, and just very successful guy. He'd only bought the brewery because he owned a ski resort in the Czech Republic. Really liked the managing director, and went to managing director after they sold the ski resort and said, "What should we do next?" He said, "Let's buy a brewery." So as you do. So anyway, those guys were really, really cool. We got on really well, and we were going to do a deal with the brewery where we then took the rights, took 51% of the beer and grow, and we had investors lined up. And he had found out along this journey that the brewery itself, because it was an old Czech brewery, an old Soviet Union, it had in the town Zatech, and was called Zatečský pivovar, that they had the brand rights to the name Zatech. Carlsberg sold the second biggest brand in Russia called Zatech. So he effectively went to them and said, "Look, tell you what, you can either, buy my brewery off me for a premium, or I can make life difficult for you in Russia." So they bought the brewery off them, at which point, that was the end. So the Carlsberg CEO, I sat down with him and he said, "Look, Nick, I'm sorry, but we don't work with people who have distribution rights. We own things lock, stock," which is fair enough. So they brought me out of my rights, which was fine. It was good. And then hired me as international director, and we decided that they'd never made a headway into America. So we decided that the best way to get into America was an organic, craft, gluten-free Czech beer, if anything was going to work. So then my wife quit her job, and we spent 18 months in America, traveling around selling beer.
That's a lot of people's dream.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant. It was 9 months finding a distributor. So driving from Boston down to Florida, across, glorified postman. We would just ring places the day before we got into the States, because lots of states, because of prohibition, lots of states would only have, 2, 3 distributors. So you'd find those distributors, you ring them in advance, turn up with a case of beer, leave the beer if need be. Went around up to California, up to Vancouver, found a brilliant distributor who were kind of a specialist beer and wine distributor in California, covered the whole of California. Again, good place to launch gluten-free and organic.
Oh, yeah.
Market. Not the worst place for us to pick as well.
No.
And then spent 9 months then doing the whole training their staff, visiting clients, stuff like that. So, and then came back to the UK. I'm not great at working at large companies. So at that point, the Carlsberg thing had become pretty boring for me once I was back in the UK. And, we were training the Carlsberg sales teams on selling it and this, that, and the other, and very slow decision-making. I wanted to be the first one to have craft. I wanted to be the first one in the UK. A lot of restaurant chains and customers asking me to do draft gluten-free beer. the brewery had it all lined up to put a kegging line in for these specialist sort of small keg units that you see. So because that was critical for gluten-free, because then you weren't on the other taps, you could have your own dedicated unit. And every quarter they would have the board meeting and they go, oh, we'll come back to the next quarter. And I had my customers, so I started to look bad to my customers because I was promising it was coming and it was never coming. So that's when I started to look over things. So I was doing a number of different things. I started, myself and two people started a business that was working in Africa. Again, well, really for third world, we were trying to use micro sales agents bookkeeping data. So we basically wrote an app that would work on the oldest, worst Android phones to enable them to basically capture their data. The idea being we could make the unbanked bankable. So we won a Vodafone America's grant for that. We got on an incubator in California for that. My two co-founders were in California, but it just became too much. By that point, I had met Sean and done his R&D tax credits through the lead investor. Sean's the original founder of Decom, and we got on really well. And we decided, to do a little bit of work together. And so I was doing a bit of work with him. I was doing a bit of work for consulting. I was still doing a bit of work for Carlsberg. I was doing that. And my daughter was born, and after she was about 6 months old. And I found in the period of about that 6 months, I was in Nairobi, I was in Denmark, I was in California twice, and I was somewhere else as well. This is not sustainable.
Yeah.
Not even a normal job.
Well, with a young family.
Yeah, I do have priorities. So at that point, I joined Decom, and yeah, it's been brilliant. That was about 6 years ago, and that's been Decom since.
And you're still the least technical person.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been a journey to get here. But ultimately, as long as I'm doing something that's interesting and mixed, then I'm happy. And a good team around me. We've got a really, really good team here. They really enjoy. I definitely like the international aspect. Most of what I've done is international. So, I think people are always surprised when they say, so how much do you work in the North Sea? It's like 10% of our work is in the North Sea. At the moment we've got 4 saws in Australia, 3 offshore at the moment, 1 sitting in Perth. We've got, 2 in Brazil. We've got 1 sitting in Louisiana. We've got 2 going to Canada here shortly. I've got 1 sitting in Norway. So it's everywhere.
Yeah, certainly from when I first met the company, not necessarily yourself, but when I first met the company, it was pretty clear that this was going to be an international solution. Decommissioning is such an international industry anyway. It's one of the conversations I regularly have with people is, we fixate on a particular basin. It doesn't matter where it is, whether it's Norwegian Shelf, British sector, North Sea, whether it's Gulf of Mexico, whether it's Brazil, wherever. We sort of fixate on it, and that becomes, that's our market or that's our area. Reality is, everywhere around the world, we're doing the same work.
Yeah.
Everywhere's doing the same work. Everywhere is facing the same challenges. How do you cut things? If you want to get them up and be able to do certain things with them, what's the most efficient way? Do you use shears? Do you use diamond wire? Do you use a chop saw? And that doesn't matter whether you're doing it off Africa, off South America, off North America, onshore.
It doesn't matter.
It's the same. It's the same challenge. So it makes so much sense that you're a UK domiciled business, but your business is everywhere.
Yep, absolutely.
The same as the beer. People drink beer all over the world. There are tastes in different places. There's different preferences, I guess.
Yeah, and different priorities.
Yeah.
I like Australia so much because environmental is such a priority, which suits us as a business because it means cost doesn't come into it as much. We are a slightly more expensive solution than some.
Yeah. But I look at what you do, and I look at the workflow holistically for removal of pipelines and flexibles, and there's different bits that you can adjust. Do you cut it quickly in the ocean?
Yeah.
To get it out more quickly, and then you've got to deal with it when you get on shore, or do you take a little bit more time to cut it differently in the water, so you can do different things with it more quickly when you get it on shore? It's a really interesting sort of balance to look at, and I can really see, the differentiators in there. And it sort of comes back to where you were with your gluten-free beer. It's a product that has a market,
Yep.
and you offer it as a service into that, as that here is the option. If you want a beer that's got no gluten in it, this is where you go. If you want a nice sharp-edged cut on your pipelines, then this is the tool that you use.
But that's an interesting one though, because that to me is still, it's something we've been banging on about for 3-4 years. And I remember there was a period about 2-3 years ago where I did a couple of different talks on it, and it seems to have quietened down now, where there is still a disconnect between the onshore contracting and the offshore contracting. And I don't know how you influence the operators to try and be more aligned on that, because I think it annoys the onshore guys because they're getting it back in a certain state. But as long as the contracts are exclusively awarded one and the other and looked at on their own merits without considering those merits, there are times you're going to make a decision for offshore that's cheaper that actually ends up costing you more in the tail. And it still doesn't seem to have been addressed.
I think when I look, I had some interesting conversations a few weeks ago in Australia with several operators, and they were looking at what they were doing with flexibles and umbilicals and pipelines that were starting to come out, and the challenges around the removal sequence and then the cleaning and recycling, the clean and recyclability once it gets onshore. And through that conversation, we actually came to realize that right now, the most active jurisdictions doing that work are Australia and Brazil.
Yes, we do that.
And both of those are still in the early few years of, you come to these, you take the traditional approach, you award your offshore contract, you award your onshore contract, or you award a single contract, but you don't necessarily think about the optimization of that until it hits you in the face one day, where you walk into a yard and you've got a whole load of material that you're struggling to deal with because of the methodology you took to remove it. So to me, I think where we're at now as an industry, that conversation is starting to happen. And so you were probably a couple of years ahead of the curve on that. But I think I genuinely see that starting to happen now. We're in countries, we're talking about countries who have a very high aspiration for recycling and for management of the material that comes out of the back, and they're seeing more of this than other jurisdictions have seen. The UK, as an external observer, predominantly it's been about platforms and wells. Not so much about pipelines and flexibles.
No, it's been P&A,
So there's a lot of focus on P&A. There's a lot of focus on getting the platforms out, disposal of the platforms, which is absolutely critical.
No, absolutely. It makes sense.
It's all key work.
Yeah.
But then you go to somewhere like in Australia or Brazil, and that is still a part of it. But you've also got hundreds of kilometers of pipelines and flexibles coming out, which is just a different work profile. And it takes a while for the people working there to catch up with realizing that they're actually breaking new ground in some of these spaces. So, I think to me, I see this as being, the sort of the next phase, if you like, for decommissioning, that we're moving from just take this platform out, plug those welds, remove all that wellhead equipment, to much more of a holistic view of the removal needs. And that then will translate, I hope, into a more holistic view of the workflow as well.
I think the economics work as well, because previously, years ago, the commodity prices weren't high enough that recycling was a nice to have or a mandated, but ultimately it was an uneconomical cost driver because it was quicker to scrap it and cheaper, more cost efficient. Now, the price of the materials means that actually recycling makes economic sense even after all the processing costs and the efforts. So that inevitably, money always changes things as well. So.
Yeah, and that helps the companies, the operators, title holders that want to have that social license piece as well. Not every operator wants to go down that path, but those that really do want to maximize the value of what and the story that they tell around the removal of the materials, they need to have the solutions that'll let them do that. So Yeah, it's an interesting one, that's for sure. Yeah.
And are you seeing much more of the onshore coming in your conversations now within decom? Because a lot of the decom initially, that I'd seen was always just offshore talked about.
To me, it depends where I am.
Okay.
Here in the UK, it's all offshore. I think I was talking to someone the other day, something like 35 or 40 wells onshore in the UK. You go to other places, I talk a lot with Canada, with PTAC in Canada, and they have got hundreds of thousands of onshore wells. And that comes with all of the ecosystem and infrastructure and everything that goes with it.
On your podcast, and I think you said it had 500,000 onshore wells. And I went, geez, I need to talk to Norman about that. Find out what's going on.
Yeah, just huge numbers. And then in Australia, we've got the big Chevron project that's underway on Barrow Island, WA Oil, 880 plus wells and all of the infrastructure that goes with that on a Class A nature reserve. Got to be so cautious, so considered, so careful working through the process on all of that. But then onshore, we've got, I think, about 15 or 20,000 more wells and a whole bunch of infrastructure that goes with it. But again, the narrative and the decommissioning, when you talk decommissioning, in most people's minds, what they think about is a 20,000 ton topsides.
Yeah, they don't think about a miniature.
They don't think about
wellhead.
they don't think about the pipelines and the wellheads and everything else. And that's just part of the evolution of the story. So yeah, the onshore piece to me is, I think there's a lot of opportunity in the onshore side to optimize it. And I could see a tool like you guys make looking like the things that you see the timber industry use.
That's pretty much the sort of the stripper of.
They have a grab and a saw and a stripper, and they grab hold of a tree, cut it off at the base, twist it on its side, strip.
Well, after this, I'll show you the video animation of the new tool cutting the wellhead, because it's also they're tiny, the wellheads, and whenever I'm talking to somebody, I just talk about the nodding donkeys because that's what everybody knows, and then everyone says to me at the moment, I used to watch Landman because they're doing it in that, and the decommissioning of Landman.
Yeah, I've heard. I've not watched it.
I'm not watching it either. So, but yeah, it's
brilliant. Well, look, that's been absolutely superb, mate. Fascinating to hear what your story is. I was not expecting to get into gluten-free beer so early in the morning, but no, look, thanks so much for your time. For those listening to this when it goes out, very shortly after this, we're going to be doing a webinar with yourselves as well to talk about that wonderful new tool on the spreader bar. If you catch this after the webinar's gone out, you'll be able to find it on our YouTube channel. And beyond that, thank you very much, mate.
Thank you, Francis.
Appreciate it. Cheers, Alan.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.